What happens when a quiet man steps up to help a kid and ends up facing a judge who laughs in his face? You won't believe how the room goes silent when the truth finally steps in. Before we begin the story, write in the comments where you are watching us from. They say you can tell a man's worth by how he treats folks who got nothing to give back. That morning, I was just trying to be that man. I had a paper bag of warm apple pies in my hand, the ones my mama loved so much she'd light up when I walked through her nursing home door. She'd say, "You're the sunshine walking in." And let me tell you, at her age, sunshine's rare. I parked at the cracked lot outside, thinking of the stories she'd share, when I saw him. A young brother arguing with a parking lot guard, a man with a red face and a badge too big for his shirt, claiming the kid owed a fee for a spot that had a big free parking sign staring down at them like it was laughing. The kid's hands were shaking, voice soft, trying to explain he had no cash. The guard? He was already flexing that tiny power trip, tapping his ticket pad like a promise. I stepped up, nodded at the young brother, and said, "Don't worry, I got you." Slipped the guard a 20, because I wasn't about to let this kid leave thinking the world was nothing but hard corners and cold shoulders. The kid's eyes watered. He stammered a "thank you," clutching his grocery bag like it was gold. I told him to keep his head up, watched him walk off with his pride intact, and felt like maybe I did something right that day. But the world's got a funny way of paying you back for kindness. I barely turned to head to my car when I saw two officers walking up, their boots heavy on the pavement like they owned it. "Sir, we need to speak with you," one said, his hand already on his belt, like he was expecting trouble from a man holding pies. I tried to explain, pie bag still in hand. "Brothers, I was just helping the young man. He wasn't doing nothing wrong." They looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Next thing I knew, they were telling me to put my hands behind my back for interfering. One of them snatched the pies, letting them fall to the ground, apple filling spilling onto the pavement, steam rising like a spirit leaving. They didn't even flinch as I watched the gift I bought for my mother bleed out on the concrete. They cuffed me, tight enough that I felt the cold bite of metal, and marched me across that lot like I was a spectacle for the morning traffic. I remember seeing a mother pulling her child close, her eyes wide, like I was some sort of warning sign. They tossed me in the back of that cruiser, no questions asked, while I sat there with pie filling on my jeans, the sweet smell turning sour as the minutes dragged on. I looked out that window, watching the world roll by, and thought about my mama sitting in her room, waiting for a son who wasn't coming through that door today. They booked me for obstruction. No phone call, no explanation, just cold stares and clipped voices behind the counter. 6 hours on a hard bench, the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead, the smell of bleach and sweat sinking into my clothes, while I kept telling myself to breathe. The waiting ended when they dragged me into the courtroom. That's where I saw him, Judge Martin Clark, a man with a gray mustache and eyes that looked like they stopped seeing people a long time ago. He glanced at the papers, then at me, and for a moment I thought he was going to say something human. Instead, he laughed, loud, sharp, the kind of laugh that slices the air. He leaned back in his chair, looking at me like I was entertainment, like my life was just another funny story in his day. "So, this is our hero," he said, smirking at the officers who chuckled behind me. I stood there, wrists still aching from the cuffs, clothes rumpled, my dignity somewhere back on that parking lot pavement. I wanted to tell him about my mama, about the pies, about how I was just trying to do one right thing. But all I saw was that smirk, that laugh echoing in the room, bouncing off the walls like it belonged there. And I realized, standing in front of that bench, that kindness had a price in this world. And sometimes that price was watching a man with a robe and a gavel laugh at you while everyone else forgot you were human. What happened next changed everything. You don't want to miss how this unfolds. You ever stand in a place that's supposed to be about justice and feel the air so heavy it presses on your chest? That courtroom was a cold, polished box, walls lined with faces that looked everywhere but at me. I could smell the old wood and coffee that had gone cold, could hear the shuffle of papers, the echo of heels on the floor. It was quiet, too quiet, like the calm before a storm that folks pretend they don't see coming. Judge Clark leaned back in his chair, that smirk still hanging on his face like it was carved there. He tapped his pen, slow, like he was waiting for me to entertain him. The prosecutor, a young man with a tight tie and a tighter jaw, cleared his throat and started rattling off words that sounded big but felt empty. Disturbance, interference, public disruption. Every word felt like a pebble thrown at a window, trying to crack me without leaving a mark. I tried to speak, to tell him what really happened, but Judge Clark cut me off with a wave of his hand, still smiling. Let the record show. Our community hero has something to say. Folks in the room chuckled, and it was the kind of laugh that felt like a slap across the face. I caught the eye of an older black woman sitting in the back, clutching her purse, her eyes sharp and wet, shaking her head like she'd seen this play out too many times. I looked at the judge, took a breath that tasted like old air, and said, "Your Honor, I was just helping a young man who was being harassed for no reason." Clark raised an eyebrow, pen pausing mid-tap. "Harassed, you say? Or maybe he was being taught a lesson he needed to learn?" That's when I felt it. That burn in my chest, the one you get when you realize you're not just fighting one man. You're standing in the middle of a system that's ready to chew you up just to keep itself comfortable. The prosecutor smirked, flipping through his file. "We have witness statements from the officers, Your Honor, describing Mr. Harris as aggressive and confrontational." Aggressive? That word sat heavy in the room. Folks shifted in their seats, some looking down, others pretending to check their watches. That word was thrown around too easy, too often, and it made every good deed I'd done that day disappear under its weight. I could feel my hands clenching, nails pressing into my palms. My mama's face flashed in my mind, her smile when she saw me at her door, her saying, "Baby, always stand tall, no matter how hard they try to bend you." I spoke up, voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your Honor, I was not aggressive." I was helping Judge Clark leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Helping or interfering with law enforcement? His smile was gone, replaced by a thin, cold line. The officers who had arrested me stood at the side, arms crossed, looking everywhere but at me. One of them shifted his weight, his eyes flicking toward the door, like he was waiting for this to be over so he could get back to his coffee. A heavy silence settled in, stretching longer than it should have. Then the judge chuckled again, a low sound that crawled up the walls. "You people always think you're helping," he muttered, almost like it was meant for himself. I felt the room tilt for a moment, the weight of those words pressing down on me. You people. Like we were all the same in his eyes, all trouble, all problems, all meant to sit down and be quiet. My jaw tightened, and I could taste the iron of my own breath as I held back every word I wanted to say. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, the tension like a cord stretched too tight. In that moment, I realized that kindness wasn't what they wanted from us. They wanted silence. They wanted heads bowed, eyes down, voices quiet. But I wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. Judge Clark turned to the prosecutor. "Prepare the paperwork. We will move to sentencing if there is no plea." The prosecutor nodded, flipping another page, his eyes glancing over me like I was nothing but a note on his desk. The door at the back of the courtroom opened, letting in a small gust of air that smelled like the world outside, like freedom, like everything this place wasn't giving me. I looked around, saw the woman in the back straighten up, saw her eyes meet mine, giving me that small nod that said, "Don't you dare give in." My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stood there, rooted, but inside, a storm was building. This is the turning point. Everything you've been waiting for happens right here. Stay to see how he stands his ground. You ever feel the moment when the air shifts in a room, like even the walls are holding their breath? That was the courtroom right then. Judge Clark leaning back, pen tapping, acting like he held the world in his hand. But I stood there, refusing to bow, even with the weight pressing down on my shoulders like a sack of bricks I never asked to carry. Then, the door opened. A man in a sharp black suit stepped in, slow, calm, carrying a folder under his arm like it was nothing more than Sunday paperwork. He nodded to the bailiff, walked right past the prosecutor who tried to stop him with a whisper, and stepped up to the judge's bench. The room didn't know whether to blink or breathe. Clark frowned, annoyed. "Who exactly do you think you are?" The man didn't answer. He opened the folder, slid a set of papers across the bench, with the calm of someone who's done this dance 100 times. Clark looked down, and I swear, for the first time that day, his smirk cracked. His eyes scanned the papers, flicking back and forth. That pen of his stopping mid-tap, hand frozen like he forgot how to move. The silence stretched so long you could hear the humming of the old ceiling lights, the nervous cough of the young prosecutor, the hush of the woman in the back clutching her purse tighter. Judge Clark's face turned a shade paler. He cleared his throat, trying to find the voice that had filled the room a moment before. "Why was I not informed of this earlier?" The man in the black suit calmly replied, "All due procedures were followed. You may proceed." Clark looked at me, eyes no longer dancing with mockery. Now there was something else, something like fear mixed with the bitter taste of pride breaking. His lips parted, words trying to form, but he closed them again, swallowing hard. The prosecutor tried to peek over the papers. "Your Honor, if I may—" Clark shot him a glare sharp enough to cut. "Not now." I stood there, heart pounding, not sure what was in those papers, but feeling the shift, the crack in the walls of that system that had felt so unmovable just moments before. Finally, Clark cleared his throat, voice quieter. "Case dismissed. Mr. Harris, you are free to go." He didn't look at me when he said it. couldn't. The bailiff blinked, then stepped forward to unlock the cuffs from my wrists, the cold bite of metal giving way to freedom, leaving red marks on my skin that would fade, but not the memory. I turned to walk out, but stopped, looked back at Judge Clark, who was now staring at the papers, his shoulders slumped, that robe hanging heavy on him. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him, but then I remembered the laugh, the smirk, the way he looked at me like I was entertainment. I nodded to the woman in the back, who gave me a small, proud smile, her eyes saying, "That's how you stand tall." And I walked out, each step feeling like reclaiming a piece of me they tried to take. Outside, the air felt different, fresh, loud, alive. Cars passed, horns honked, people laughed on sidewalks, the world moving on like it always does. But I was no longer the same man who walked into that building. I took out my phone, hands still shaking, and called my mama. She picked up, her voice warm, tired, asking, "You comin', baby?" "Yeah, Mama," I said, looking up at the sky, letting the sun hit my face. "I'm on my way." I got into my car, the seat warm from the sun, gripping the wheel, feeling every breath, every beat of my heart, each second a reminder that standing up was worth it, even when the world tried to push you down. And as I drove toward her, past the street that watched me walk into that courtroom, I knew this. They could laugh. They could try to break me. But in the end, I still stood, still walked, still lived. And that's something no gavel, no smirk, no cold cell could ever take from me.